As many of you know, my name's Dan Runcie, the founder of Trapital. We cover the business of entertainment. We're at intersection of media and technology. And we're joined today by my guy, Troy Carter.
What's up, man?
Good to talk to you as always, Troy. Today we're going to talk about a few things, but I think the key themes will be AI, algorithms, and authenticity. We both work in music, invested in this space. But even taking a step back from music, we talk a lot about AI. We were just talking now. There are so many developments happening in this space, especially when you're building a company, you're investing in the space. How do you stay ahead of everything? How do you make sure that your finger is on the pulse?
You know, I think for me personally, it's about staying curious. And I think, you know, that's always been like a key trait for me, like since I was a young kid. And I think I've been having a ton of fun because I think there's so many new technologies to experiment with. And I like to be out as far in front of these things as possible. So I think it's like, you know, if you can't get your hands dirty and play in the dirt and get the dirt under your fingernails, you know, so that's what I do with all of the software. You know, Susie knows, I think I have like every subscription you could think of or whatever. So, you know, I try everything. So I think, you know, just learning by building and playing with it and following some really smart people, you sort of stay, you try to stay ahead of the curve. But like we were just saying, you know, every 6 weeks we're seeing these leaps now. So, you know, it's very hard to stay ahead. You just got to keep riding a wave right now.
And where are you getting most of your information from to stay ahead?
You know, from other founders, from, you know, smart people that I follow on X, from, you know, I read a ton. So I'm just always digging. I'm like a truffle pig with technology. So I'm just trying to find like what are these people working on right now? So, and I ask a ton of questions.
I remember Mark Andreessen had this quote recently. He said he's getting a quarter of his information from X, following smart people, a quarter of the information from reading what the AI generative prompts will give to him based on what he's sharing.
Yeah.
A quarter from podcasts that are sharing stuff.
Yeah.
And then a quarter that he's still reserving for old, tested books or other things that have stood the test of time, so that there's still that balance of old and new.
Absolutely. And like I would say my division is close to that. I think part of it too is I give myself a lot of empty space too. So it's like sometimes I just need breathing room to not read anything, not be on my computer, being out in nature, and like that's where I get a lot of my downloads from. And I think that fresh space is what makes it, you know, you just give it a little palate cleanser as well too.
Right, it's like you still need some form of real world.
Oh, absolutely.
To help.
So because what I'm big on, and for me, I think one of the competitive edges too is I still read a lot of books, and I think is that theory of use it or lose it. And I even noticed, I was reading a Ray Dalio piece today, and I was reading the comments, and everybody was asking Grok to, you know, what's the TLDR on this or whatever, as I was looking through the comments, because it was said, you know, 46-minute read or whatever it was. And I'm like, people aren't going to have the capacity for deep thought because they're going to let software do all the deep thought for them. And when you lose that capacity and that software goes away for any reason, you're stuck. And I'm convinced there's going to be, you know, and especially in the times that we're living in now, we got to be prepared for there to be some sort of period where you don't have access to the software. And when you got to think for yourself, and you're not trained to think for yourself, or you forgot how to think for yourself, you lose a bit of an advantage. So I just like, you know, so for me, that's like my gym, still being able to read and think and have my own ideas.
Let's talk about that because I feel like sometimes people overvalue just how much the process is you taking in the information in its full part and then you picking apart which parts are the most valuable. You saying, okay, this I can put here and form my own thought behind it. But if you're just saying, hey, Grok, summarize this, please, then you're just getting the same thing everyone else gets. And that just takes you further and further away from anything that's authentic, anything that's differentiated by any means.
Because, you know, if you look at like part of learning and part of reading is not just, it's basically to be able to digest other ideas and to be able to come out with your ideas based off of those ideas. So it's like, so you're pulling from all of these different spaces, but, you know, the whole point is for you to come up with your own point of view about it, you know, and versus it just being a sort of one-way thing. And I think that's what we're being trained for right now.
Right. And it reminds me of things that you and I have talked about in the past, right? You hear so much about taste. How many people have heard people referring to taste as the differentiator? Okay, seeing a few hands in the room. And it's hard to develop your own taste if you don't have anything that really stands out as your own thing. So maybe, since not everyone raised their hands, maybe if you can give a quick explanation about why taste is important and how people can go about making sure that that stays at the front of whatever they're doing.
Yeah, it's like, you know, when everybody has access to the same exact tools and the same exact information, I think taste and point of view is going to be what makes the difference, because it's like you got to know the difference between a good photo and a bad photo. You got to know the difference between a good song and a bad song. You got to know the difference between a good script and a bad script. And so that's going to matter. Like, you know, and I think what I'm seeing is models are getting better and better, but it has to be somebody on the other side that knows, okay, this is better than that. And this is what's going to be presented to the public. And so I think being able to have those filters right now, I think is going to, you know, be a differentiator. That's going to change, but I think is a window right now where it's really going to matter.
And this is relevant to music because this is the thing that people that have been successful in this space have always had some ability to discern, right? There's no mathematical equation you can go back to that says, oh, why did L.A. Reid choose to put so-and-so to the forefront, or why do they drop certain artists, right? So much of that is who they're pushing forward. I know that you have been at the front for a lot of those conversations. So it may be good for the audience just to hear a bit why music and why people that work in the intersection that you've been in can work well and succeed in that space, in that intersection.
Yeah, I think, you know, what made me successful wouldn't make me successful today. And I think when I look at the music industry right now and culture right now, we're just in such a different time. And I'm just going to be honest, like, I think Suno is the most consequential piece of technology that ever came into music. The most consequential. More than radio, more than the phonograph. Yes. Because it equalized the playing field. So it is, you know, when I first saw the technology, I'm like, this is pretty terrible. It was bad. And then probably 6 months ago, I'm on it and I'm like, yo, this thing has gotten really good. And then some people started playing me music from it. I can't tell you how many managers, producers, and songwriters that a lot of people in this room know use it now, by the way. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. And honestly, like, I feel like one of my concerns is, like, a lot of, I guess America in general is very AI pessimistic, just in general. And it's inevitable. It's happening whether we like it or not. It's happening. It's going to be a part of our everyday lives. And my concern for creatives is that creatives will become so dogmatic about it that they get left behind, because it's going to create a new crop of creators. So it's like, so if you're a kid right now, you're not coming in learning Ableton. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to music school. You're going on Suno, and you're going to learn how to create songs there, and that's going to be your primary format. The same way we saw people become YouTube natives or streaming natives. It's just a different generation. And what ends up happening, and you know, I'm old enough to have lived through a few technology cycles. You have people who push back against technology that get left behind, and by the time they jump in, they're a little too far behind. You know, so whether it's release frequency, whether it's, you know, like release strategies, like all of the things that natives just get naturally, because they don't have a history of, you know, 20 years of how it used to be done, they jump out way ahead. And so if I'm an artist, at minimum, I'm learning as much as I can about it and then making my decisions based off of that. But, you know, I just think it's, there's a lot that, one, I would use it to my advantage because I think there's a huge amount of upside in it. But I wouldn't be as afraid of it as I see a lot of creatives are right now.
Let's talk more about the consequential part of it, because I'm sure some people may hear that and they say, okay, well, streaming seemed pretty consequential. You look at anyone from Soulja Boy coming out with the video straight on YouTube goes to #1, and then anyone that have released through the SoundCloud era, and then even what some independent artists have been able to do the past few years. That's been pretty big for the industry. And then why is this?
But you had to have some level of talent to do it. You had to have some level of talent to do it. AI removes that. So if you can type, if you could type in natural language, I want to make a record that sounds like this with this, and that. You get it back. I want to change this, and that. In 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you got something that's just as good as everything on Spotify, which is not a compliment, by the way. Because, by the way, 90% of music is bad on Spotify right now. But it's creating an equal playing field at that point. So you can go on and make a song. People are going to make, I heard a couple songs where I'm like, that's a hit. That record right there is a hit. And that took that person 15 minutes to make it, by the way. And fans don't care. They don't care. They just want to hear good music. You know, so I feel like it's, I look at these platforms like Suno, like an Instagram, where photography, to take a good picture was really hard. You had to know names of filters and like lighting and like all of these things or whatever you had to be a professional photographer to really take an excellent picture. Instagram comes along and all of a sudden everybody takes beautiful photos. When you can layer on commercialization, and music has natural commercialization to it, all of a sudden the game changes at that point. On the flip side of it is the music industry is powered by technology companies, which is unfortunate, by the way. The people that are in charge of the music industry led the music industry off of a cliff, thinking about short-term gains. So all of these record label heads who did all of these stupid deals with these companies, who didn't innovate and build any technology themselves, who priced the music the way, you know, companies wanted the music priced and all of these things, and they're just looking at their own bonuses. The way they're incentivized is way different than the way founders of companies are incentivized. So they're thinking short term, and they're not thinking about the long-term interests of the artist. They're not thinking about the long-term interests of the business. They're thinking about, what is this quarter going to look like, and am I going to get my bonus? And they handed the keys over to technology companies. Technology companies don't give a fuck about music. It's like it's a byproduct that sits within a platform that they got to pay for, unfortunately. So the way they're looking at it is, from a technology company, is if I got to pay X amount, 70% of my revenue out to music companies for using that product, or I got to pay these billions of dollars out, and now I could get music that's almost free from all of these new artists that are making music on Suno that sounds very similar to the music that I'm paying billions of dollars for, what music am I going to point the funnel towards now? So ByteDance is a really smart company. YouTube's a really smart company. You got a lot of really, Meta's a very smart company. If they got to choose between paying Lucian Grange $11 billion this year, or all of these new creators $2 billion, they're going to point towards the $2 billion. And unfortunately, consumers won't care. They'll have that small percentage of artists that they really care about, that they're going to pay $200, $300 to go see. They'll still exist. But for the background music that you're just listening to on streaming, or that you see in a social content video, they don't care who that comes from.
And all those streams are multi-billion-dollar streams themselves. Production music, yes. Background, yes. The novelty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one thing specifically, you could speak to this better than anyone because you worked at Spotify, you worked at one of these technology companies. Did you feel like at that moment your goal was, in a lot of ways, how can we bridge the gap? I am the person that is well respected in the music space. I'm going to this technology company, which at the time, nowhere near as quote-unquote controversial as Suno may appear to be by many right now.
It was back then.
But back then it definitely was. But that's why you were brought in. And we've talked about this, whether you going there, we've seen like Leor Cohen going to YouTube. Like there's a pattern there. Do you feel like Suno is and can do the same? Or do you think that the fact that it's more consequential makes it a little tougher?
Yeah, I think so. They've already started, like even some people who work for me are working over at Suno now, like who work for me at Spotify and work for me at Atom Factory at my management company. So I feel like, they're hiring the right people, but I think this is different, where the goals with Spotify and me building out a team there, it was to really build a bridge between the music industry, because we had to do licensing with record labels. We had to do licensing with publishers. We had to build better relationships with artists, all of these things. Honestly, those companies don't have to do that at all, because they're a consumer company. And what people is, and the music industry can't sue their way out of this one, because when this goes to court, they're going to get fair use. So it's not going to be a copyright infringement thing. It's going to be fair use. Because for AI in America right now, with this administration, they're not going to do anything to slow AI down. And the moment it turns into a copyright thing where it starts bankrupting AI companies, the people in charge of this administration, who has a lot of influence, over the people that are making decisions, are going to say China's going to win the AI war if we do da 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 da. So my prediction is it's going to be fair use with copyrights. Unfortunately, by the way, because it's like a lot of artists got robbed. They stole everybody's music to create these models or whatever. But it is what it is. We either get bitch about it or really take a look at, say, okay, the train's leaving the station. How is this thing going to work? And when I saw streaming come in years ago, and I sat down with Daniel and the Spotify team, I'm looking at all of the data that was happening in the Nordics at that time. Nobody was on iTunes in the Nordics. Everybody was on this new platform, Spotify. Let's check that out. You mean to tell me for $9.99 or $7.99 a month, I could have all of the music in the world, or I could buy one album on iTunes? It's a no-brainer. This is where music's gonna go. And it's gonna end up, you get paid every time people listen, and you could build revenue, like, this is definitely where it's gonna go. So as much as I could be sort of nostalgic about things and dogmatic about things, I'm also really practical about things as well too. And I think, you know, we gotta be realistic on where things are going and make sure that, you know, we're able to benefit off of it as well too.
We should talk a bit more about the consumption piece of it, specifically for a platform like Suno, because with the Spotify example that you gave, yes, you're shifting from iTunes to streaming at that point, but the knowledge base of the underlying music is still the same, right? If you want to hear a Dr. Dre record, you want to hear 2001, whether you're buying like a set tape, CD, digital download, or streaming, that's still the same thing. But on Suno, or any of these, it could be Udio, or any of these AI generative platforms, it's different, right? It's not that, but it's something derivative off of that. So it's assuming that the consumer is then still going to be as interested in the output from a platform like Suno. How do you see that playing out? Because in production music, of course it makes sense, but how does it play out from the consumption aspect?
So think of it as, so if I look at, and we did a ton of studies on eras of music, right? Where you see natural deterioration, and nobody's listening to 1920 music anymore, 30s music, 40s music, 50s music, 60s music, 70s, 80s. Like you know, you sort of see this deterioration as generations grow older, right? And as popularity, so it'll be a merger. We'll see a merger of the two where they sort of coexist. But the reality is catalogs are going to start building from these platforms. And so if you get hit records coming out of these things, and when I mean hits, it's just songs that become popular on social. They'll be on these new platforms. They'll be on Spotify as well, too. They'll be on SoundCloud. They'll be on YouTube or whatever else. But slowly but surely, you'll see these migrations or whatever. But my guess is you'll see some acquisitions where maybe you see some of platforms merge with these types of platforms as well. So where you have creation and consumption that coexist together as well, too. So I think you'll see a combination of models, by the way.
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely what Suno and the others are pushing, right? You've seen even the way the major record labels have talked about it. One of the things that Warner Music Group CEO Robert Kinsel had mentioned recently in one of his letters is that he actually could see a platform like Suno being a benefit, because if you look at the current lay of the land at Spotify right now, they're sharing a royalty pool based off of the 100 million plus tracks that are there. Of course, the top 1% get most of the streams, but there's still a lot of distribution there. But their bet is that a platform like Suno would hopefully pull more music from the music that they own, and could that end up actually being even more additive to their catalog than the current status quo?
Yeah, it'll be new models. You know, this is new, totally new territory. You know, Robert Kinsel is probably one of the smartest guys that I met. You know, but I think Robert, you know, I think because he came from Netflix and then helped build YouTube, he sort of understands what new models look like. You know, and Netflix is a great example of just, you know, if you would have looked at what that company was in the beginning, and, you know, studios didn't take them seriously, and they changed consumer behavior, you know, and consumer behavior changes. Nobody knew you wanted to watch all of the episodes at one time. Thinking about binge watching and thinking about international programming, just all of these different types of behaviors. Netflix and technology ushered it in, and we never look back. Those old models, they look they look antiquated now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing you mentioned I want to go back to, you talked about Instagram. And for as long as I've worked in this space, people have been eager to find what is music's Instagram going to look like. And in some ways, there are aspects of Suno that do look like that. And I think, like you said, yes, it can democratize the middle where if everyone then has access to these tools, then what people are willing to pay for changes completely. But what I think Instagram also did is it raised the bar for what people were willing to pay for and also what they expected. So it wasn't like photographers went out of business. There were now photographers that could charge 10 times more than they could before because of the fact that Instagram exists. And I'm curious to see if something like that happens in the audio space in the same type of way.
Yeah, I think because music is like, we've always had a much larger commercialization than like photography. And I think we've always had larger sort of distribution systems for it. And it's going to be a lot of talented creators. I won't call them artists. I'll call them creators that come out of Suno and or whatever one of these platforms, because they'll understand, they'll come up with their own formulas for making music. And on the consumer side, TikTok's a prime example. People don't care who the artist is, because they're discovering music through the context of video, and the song just happens to be in the background, and so the context of it has zero to do with the artist. Like I was driving my daughter to school last week, and she was telling me. I always play her like old school music, and she's like, "Oh, I found this Bill Withers remix of Ain't No Sunshine." I said, well, "How'd you find that?" TikTok. This song, Bill Withers song is 1960 or whatever, but it's like she's discovering that on TikTok from a video that somebody played, some trend or whatever. So. I just feel like if you're a content creator and you're making a video, for instance, you don't have to use somebody else's song anymore. You're going to go into your Suno or Udio or whatever you're making music on, create something very specific for your video, and that's going to be a hit. That's going to be the hit. So that'll be the hit that people will go to Spotify and stream, and you'll get 10 million streams on a song that you created that you as a video creator was able to create that song. So I just feel like the whole thing's gonna shift, and so I just think we're in totally new territory. It's new territory.
Yeah.
That's why I couldn't be successful at it, by the way, because like for my definition of artistry, the bar is much higher. You got to have skin in the game. You got to have, and I'm just like, I come from a place of artistry where there's suffering in the work. You got to you wrote that song because your heart was broken. You know what I'm saying? Or this was about your life, or you got shot at for real. Mm-hmm. That wasn't just a line. These are life experiences. So for me, spending decades working with real artists, it was blood in that work, and so I like this from a live show experience and what you put into that. Susie and I worked Prince's estate for 5 years after he passed away. I'm not going from working Prince's estate to somebody who just decided they wanted to be a musician and created a song in 15 minutes and we're gonna work together. We ain't doing that. Like so my respect level for the definition of artistry sits separate from what I know where I know the music industry is going. So I got to separate my personal beliefs from where I understand the music industry is going.
But what's the skill set you think that you don't have that you think that you would, let's say, need to be successful at if you were starting out?
Love of art. I'm serious. It's like, I think a lot of people right now have a love of the music business. I think there's a lot of people who have the love of money. I think there's a lot of people who people are in it for different reasons. And guess what? We can make a lot of money doing it. We can, I love the business as well or whatever, but it is very hard to be a successful manager if you aren't in love with artists. Because being a manager is hard. Mm-hmm. You got to put up with a lot. You got there's blood in that work, so it's me away from my family. It's it's a lot of work you put into being a manager. And if you don't absolutely love it, you're going to hate it. So for me, I'm and that was my breaking point when I really decided I don't want to do management anymore, is when I woke up and I was still successful as a manager, but I wasn't in love with the artist. And that was where I'm I can't do it. It's not in me.
And that can always be the tough trap, right? Because you know that treadmill can just keep going. The money's good, and you convince yourself, and then boom, 10 years later, you're in the same spot.
Yep, 100%. And it's and you're not as and for me personally, I've had the most success with artists when it was artists who I really, really believed in. I was I'm in love. This is I know what this artist is. I know the DNA, and it was the artist wasn't making no money. You know what I'm saying? So it's 90% of the artists that I've worked with were artists who was at zero or less than mid when I came in, and then we built it, So it's you're taking bets on people. So to take those bets, you got to really, really, really believe, because you don't make money as a manager unless that artist becomes successful.
And this is where things feel a bit full circle in a way, right? Because you're mentioning the skills that would be required now. Maybe someone has a bit less love for this, but they are more of a quant in certain ways, right? But on the other hand, where do they get the taste from if they're going purely off of someone that is an artist manager of the Suno generation, the Udio generation, right?
You'll get, the one thing I have faith in is I got faith in culture. And I meet a lot of young people who I feel are just dope. Oh my God, they'll go from knowing dope movies to obscure fashion designers to some up and coming, visual artists. And so there's people who still have refined taste. So I got faith in that part of it, so so they'll always exist. The question is it going to be enough of them? Are they going to be trained to turn taste into structure and strategy? Because you got to have taste, but you also got to have some structure. You also got to have some strategy. You also got to have some discipline, and that comes from training and mentorship and those things or whatever. So I'm pretty optimistic that we'll find those layers will still continue to surface.
Switching gears a bit, you talked about Bill Withers earlier, and you also talked about the Prince estate. We should talk about music catalogs and rights sales. That's been a growing space, and in many ways, it sits opposite of what's happening right now with these platforms. Not fully, but it sits a bit opposite because even though, like you said, there's definitely a decay in terms of the popularity of music from the 70s, 80s, 90s, there are people that are still spending billions of dollars on those catalogs and those rights from that era. What's your take on that space right now?
I think it's really incredibly smart people that are coming into that space, and how do I put it? That's not even the music business anymore. So it's like, so we're talking about, different categories. You got sort of art and artists, you got the music business, and then you got the private equity business. And I think catalogs are no longer music assets. I think they've become financial assets. And where it concerns me is you gotta have a certain level of stewardship when it comes to estates and legacies of highly important individuals. And so when I look at, some of the most important artists that ever walked the earth, by the way, and humankind, they can't be treated like financial assets. They got to be treated as cultural assets. So the same way we would treat a Monet or a Picasso or a Van Gogh and the Met Museum and have a Monet that's worth $350 million that hangs in the Met. That's the same way I want to see a Prince treated, or a Michael Jackson treated, or Bruce Springsteen. Like, if I'm thinking about just who these cultural icons are, that they're important. So what it shows you when I compare it to a Monet and a Picasso or a Basquiat, they still could be highly valuable assets, but these assets are treated like art versus treated solely as commerce. And so that's what we got to be careful with. Like, how do you treat those assets? Because if you just start throwing all of these things in a fucking Ford Escort commercial, you know what I'm saying, or whatever, it's like they become less and less and less valuable. So it's like you got this stewardship that comes with those.
Is there anything that you've seen, any examples of a lack of stewardship or opportunities?
A lot of them, but I won't mention them.
Okay. Well, without using a specific artist, I understand. You don't want to call anyone out, but yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I guess less about particular artists, but maybe on the positive side, is there anything that you've seen that you've liked, that you've said, okay, this is a good example? Could we see more of this, especially after an acquisition or after a deal has happened?
Yeah, I think it's early. I think it's early days. It's still a young space when I look at the catalog acquisition space. So I don't know if there's enough. Are there enough data points yet for me to say, oh my God, somebody has done an excellent job? Honestly, I think Michael Jackson's estate, I think they've been incredibly responsible. Because if I look at where Michael, when he passed away, I think he was almost $500 million in debt. Reputation wasn't in the best place or anything like that or whatever. And the legacy has sort of faded of who Michael was. And I think with what they've done with the Broadway play, I've heard incredible things about this Antoine Fuqua version of the movie. I heard is like great. And like, they just made really great choices, and it's still early, but I feel like they've been really responsible. Like really, they haven't made stupid. Nothing they've done has been is no net negative there. All net positive, I think.
And I know you would know better than anyone, having worked with the Prince estate. Maybe speak a little bit to how tough this can be, because I think from the outside, there are a lot of these estate management relationships, business deals that can make people say, what is going on over there? It's like a shit show. But I also know that it's harder than it often seems from the outside, just given all of the stakeholders involved.
No, I remember the day they announced that I was going to do the Prince estate. The news broke, and Jimmy Iovine called me up. And he's like, Troy, what the fuck are you thinking doing this? He said, 99% of the people who inherit this stuff have 1% of the integrity of the person that they're inheriting from. He was like, just be super careful, like, because he's like, you don't know the hornet's nest that you may hit. And, because when somebody passes away, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of parties or whatever else. I had the time of my life during the Prince estate. It was such an incredible experience. And, granted, it's like, you deal with probate and things like that or whatever. I was on a personal level, I was very sensitive to what his family was going through. Because I'm like, the level if you haven't been in the music industry and all of a sudden you get Prince's estate, you don't know, like, you don't even know where to start. And then all of the emotion after having a loved one pass away, and like, it's a lot of things. It's fresh territory for everybody. So one, have some level of empathy for the people who you got to deal with on this thing. And then the toughest part was you never can answer what would Prince do. That's a lot of weight on what would Prince do, because I can't do what Prince would do. And this is one of the most brilliant artists in history, one of the most complex artists in history. And then you sort of have this burden of, okay, we have to pay a tax bill with probate, so you gotta monetize, because that's part of your job, because it's in the probate system. And at the same time, you gotta protect his legacy with your life. And so it's like, just what does that balance look like? And but we had, that it was such a fun project, such a fun project.
Would you ever manage another estate for an artist at that level?
Absolutely. Like, if it's not many of those, so that's a phone call. When I got that phone call, I was at Spotify, and I called Daniel from Spotify, and I told him, I'm like, dude, I'm doing this one. Like, they're like, and they were cool about it or whatever, but that's, who wouldn't do that?
Yeah. And I mean, especially, you brought up the point about just not being able to know what Prince would say. Like, did you find yourself repeating those lines, don't own your masters or your masters will own you, or any of those Prince axioms?
Well, what we did was we went out and we brought on Michael Howe worked with Prince on the remaster Purple Rain. And so, and I know Michael Howe forever. And I'm like, okay, if Prince trusted Michael, I'm definitely going to trust Michael. So he came on board as like our sort of curator and A&R. We brought on one of Prince's creative guys, Trevor, who worked with Prince in the past. And then we brought on a Prince historian who knew everything there is to know about Prince. Like he could hear a song and say, "Oh, that was 1986 Syracuse, live from da 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 da," and so that was Dwayne. And so we had a crew who really knew Prince too. So it's like so the weight wasn't just on us to make business decisions. It was, we had a team around that could kind of like say, okay, this is the closest we could get to what we think Prince would give us half a side eye on. Like, if so we had to be careful, but we were comfortable enough to know that, okay, we got good people around that he trusted.
That's what's up. Well, I think we have one more question. Then if we have time, I do want to open it up for Q&A, just give some folks a good opportunity to ask some questions. But we talked about a bunch of trends here: generative AI, catalogs, streaming, socials. If you had to bet or invest your own money on one trend right now, what would it be?
Whoa. Okay, you got to narrow that one down.
Okay,
narrow that one down.
Let me narrow it down a bit. One specific area in music, but let's say that it was. See, a company's tough because you may have already invested in certain things and not invested in certain things. But let's say if you weren't working on Venice, where would you at least invest your time? Maybe not even your money, but what would be the most like fun thing and the energy? You're like, yes, this is what I would do right now if I wasn't doing this.
We're in a time of flux right now, and what I was really interested in when Shaka was talking, and one of the young ladies in here was talking about growing your own food and sustainability, and this is completely opposite of music, by the way. But I feel like what we went through in COVID, when people were home again, when people were doing puzzles together with their family, when people were growing their own food and cooking together, and like the world shrunk. I think we're going to go back to the world shrinking again. So I think it's going to move incredibly crazy. It's going to get very weird and scary. It's going to be these sort of freak out moments that sort of pop up globally, and things are changing, and macroeconomic things happening, and things happening with the economy and employment and all of these things. And people are going to realize, what are we doing this for? And so I feel like being able to look at how do you invest in intimacy, smaller things you do with your hands. Like that's where I feel like is these pockets are going to happen. So I think it's going to be these huge, crazy macro waves here, and then I think there's going to be these little microwaves here.
I could definitely see that. Well, before we close things out, like I said, we do want to open up for a few questions. Anyone have anything top of mind? The question, she started talking about how will.i.am said this may be the first year we have purely authentic artists on stage, alluding to some mix of AI and others, made the Waymo analogy of having cars on the road, and how that looks at artistry moving forward and what that connection looks like between artists themselves and these platforms, assuming that hybrid relationship continues.
Yeah, Will is one of the smartest guys when it comes to this stuff. I remember years ago, I was having a conversation with Will, and he's like, Troy, I'm telling you, everything's going to go to the cloud. The cloud. Like, I said, what the fuck is the cloud? Like, nobody knew about a cloud. I never heard the terminology before, and I'm randomly talking to Will, and Will's talking about the cloud. Will is incredibly smart, incredibly ahead, and I actually like what he says in terms of what are you willing to give? And the way you're thinking about it is actually very, very smart. Because, like, I don't feel like there shouldn't be shame in using technology. It's like computers they're ubiquitous. Smartphones are ubiquitous. It's like all of these things become a natural part of our lives. And if something can help you become better or become more efficient, there's no shame in using that. But I feel like there's this sort of unnecessary cloud of shame that sort of sits on top of this stuff right now. But it's the same shame that I saw with iTunes, when people start putting their music on iTunes and you had a lot of legacy artists holding out. Like, I'm not letting Steve Jobs and them break up my album and sell singles. And you had, same thing, you had a lot of people who felt shame put like on Spotify, like it was cheapening the music by putting it on streaming. I take advantage of it where you want to be able to take advantage of it. But the key is like not letting it, the way I said, like I still like to read and stay sharp or whatever, not letting it control your practice. You know what I'm saying? Like you're still the artist at the end of the day. And being that artist, that's your superpower and that's your advantage. Artists should always be artists. And the best artists live outside of the system. And they don't create for the system. And so if I look at the artists that really break, and especially like, I lost a lot of faith in like creatives, like, and I'm like, where the hell are the Mavericks at? And then over the last few years, I started seeing, I'm like, okay, I like this artist here, or I'm seeing this artist push, and I'm seeing them not fall into the traps of streaming or the traps of, I got to post like this on TikTok to do this, or I got to do that. And they're being artists. And so I feel like if you dance to your own beat and you create your work and you start building fans the way you want to build fans, don't live by that system. Everything I'm talking about is for the people who live in that system. That's 90-something% of the artists, because most of the artists that ask questions are like, how do I conquer TikTok, or how do I conquer the algorithm on this, or how do I get on playlists, or nobody's really talking about how do I become a superstar. There's a different blueprint for that. So you have Chick-fil-A, which is, I like Chick-fil-A, but you have French Laundry over here. It's just two different types of ways. These are master chefs over here who train a certain way, and this is fast food right here. So it's like it's two different processes. Both of them are food. This is different category. Oh, I just think it's not becoming part of a system that's broken. Like, for me, it's like, honestly, I never tried to fix the music industry. That wasn't, like, I just wasn't interested. Because I'm like, these people have been doing the same exact thing for 40, 50 years. I want to do something fun. So I want to find some fun artists to do it with. I want to build a great team to do it with. And then guess what? I want to make investments in technology companies and learn from technologists and marry technologists with artists and do some cool things there. I want to find some cool new brands to work with and create new projects with them. I want to find some new ways of touring. And like, so it's just doing things that inspire others. So it's like me and my peers of managers were competing with each other and learning from each other at the same time and inspiring each other. And then our artists are competing with each other and inspiring each other. And that's what's driving new artists to come in and recreating what the business was. Like, so for us, we thought about just creating new models and things like that and never thought about what these people were doing. Because the only thing they're thinking about is how to make, most of these people only know the record business. They don't know anything outside the record business for the most part. And that's not fun or interesting.
So the question was whether or not cultural artists today will have the same impact as they've had decades in the past because of how quickly technology has evolved to where it is.
So I think great artists will always win and stand the test of time. Undefeated. I also think great scientists will always stand the test of time. And arts and science always sort of coexisted together. Always coexisted together. And you had a lot of great artists who were also scientists. So I think, you look at Michelangelo, and like it was all sort of intertwined. That's different from corporations, as you were saying earlier. It's different from corporations. Ignore those people. It's I would think of them as they're never going to be as important. They're never going to be as important. Because if I put Beyonce right here and I put Mark Zuckerberg right here, I can guarantee you most of the people are going to run over to Beyonce. If I put Taylor Swift right here and I put Elon Musk right here, most of the people are going to run over to Taylor Swift. It's like just culturally, it's a cultural importance with artists. Is natural. So I feel like artists don't have anything to worry about when it comes to that, but real artists.
So biggest lessons learned from running and starting Venice and what authenticity means to you?
Yeah, it's been, this to me is like sort of, Venice is like part 2 of my journey working with independent artists. So when I went into Spotify, I didn't know really anything about independent music because I always sort of worked with major labels when I worked with artists that I work with. And so when I was learning about the sort of short end of the stick that independent artists were getting, and I've always been an underdog, and I've always rooted for the underdogs, it made me like say, okay, I want to be in the trenches with underdogs. And one of the biggest thing I learned was, one, I thought it was a distribution problem when I came in. Because distribution to me was like this black hole. Because it's like, you just put out your music and it's just like, okay, what do I do next? And what I realized was it wasn't a distribution problem. Distribution's fixed. It's a management problem. So that gap of what do I do next and how do I execute and who do I execute with is missing. And what we learned was we can't scale that as humans. Like, so I got a really dope team at Venice, and where we like to be hands-on and like really help artists. And then when I did the math, we're like, hold up, there's 12 million independent artists right now or more. There's 20,000 professional managers. It'll never be enough managers or people to fill that. But how do we use technology to actually fill that gap? So, so what we're launching is we built this platform, Co-Manager, and that's all that it's about. So literally, it's like every bit of experience that we've had building artists over the last 30 years, and we've poured into this. So it's basically we've trained AI agents to be just as good, if not better than us, but also the ability to have AI help executing. So, okay, you know what? We found X amount of playlists that we know work for you because it worked for all of these other artists. These are what we're recommending, but also, do you want us to go get these, do you want us to pitch this to these editors for you? Or we found these venues in your neighborhood that we know other artists your size played. Do you want us to reach out to the promoters for you? And so it's very, very intelligent, very, very personalized, and being able to build tools like that that actually help artists day to day and help them scale. Because like that to me is being able to use AI for good. Like, how do you actually take this technology that stole from us to be able to give back to us now? So we're being able to sort of leverage technology that way. You know, authenticity is like, and this is where it's just going back to being your true self as an artist and not pandering to platforms. And so when we talk about a Prince, or we talk about a Gaga, or we talk about, you know, a Beyonce or a Kendrick or like any of these artists, right? It's like, I think these common denominators are like, they're not designing, they're not reverse engineering their art for platforms. You know, and it's like, you can't reverse engineer your art to say this. I'm gonna change myself to be successful on TikTok, or I'm gonna change the way I make music for Spotify. Guess what? If I want a 2-minute intro because this song deserved a 2-minute intro, or like I heard this record from Ray. That, like, Ray is one of my favorite artists. And, like, to me, she is, like, she's a dream because she's doing her own thing. But this record I heard is, like, it has to be 7 minutes long. I'm like, this is probably the best record I heard this year. But everybody's so focused on making 3-minute records because they're like, okay, nobody's going to listen to it, or I can't have an intro on it because people are going to skip, or da-da-da. No, if that was your download from God to make that record, like that's how it came through, that's how it's supposed to come through. But people are treating the platforms like God now. And like, consumers don't know what they want until they hear it. You know what I'm saying? They don't know what they want until they hear it. They didn't know they wanted Streets Have No Name to have a... that intro for Streets Have No Name is what makes that record. If Bono was writing that for TikTok, you know what I'm saying? Like, it'd be a different song right now.
Before we close out, Troy Carter. Round of applause.
And by the way, and give it up for Dan too. Dan's one of the smartest people in the business, and I love and respect.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
This is dope.